By the time his 1990 novel L.A. Confidential was made into an Academy Award-winning movie, James Ellroy had already established himself as one of the great crime novelists, heir to a tradition that includes Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler. In 1995, Time magazine named his book American Tabloid Novel of the Year. James Ellroy doesn't just write about murder and deceit. He writes about injustice and paranoia, brutality and revenge. In short, crimes of the heart. And you quickly learn they are crimes close to his own heart, springing from one crime that made him who he is today. It happened when he was just 10 years old. James Ellroy's mother was found murdered, strangled to death on a street in El Monte, California. The killer was never found, and Ellroy's life changed in ways he never imagined.
My mother's death had formed my curiosity and mandated my mental curriculum. In other words, she got me hooked on crime. She got me hooked on social history.
Without your mother's death, you would never have been hooked on crime?
I was not in the least interested in crime prior to my mother's death. After her death, man, I was reading every Hardy Boys book and kids' crime book and adult crime book that wasn't nailed down.
He went from reading about crime to committing crime. He lived with his father in this low-rent apartment. Just a block away is Hancock Park, one of L.A.'s most exclusive neighborhoods.
Used to break into this house over here.
There, at age 15, he began breaking into expensive homes.
It was a different world. People didn't have answering machines or answering services. If you called a house up and nobody answered, it meant nobody was home. And you could always find an unlocked door, a loose window screen, and get in and prowl around.
The teenage Ellroy became himself a criminal and an outcast who was eager to offend.
I went to a high school that was 99% Jewish. I did absolutely nothing well. The only way I stood out is that I wasn't Jewish, so I became a Nazi and got beat up a great deal.
You became a Nazi?
I was a Nazi at a Jewish high school, and I never believed in Nazism for 1 minute, but I craved attention, and I was the poster boy for the "If you can't love me, notice me" chapter in every child psychology textbook.
His behavior ultimately got him expelled from high school. It also got him booted out of the Army. Over the next 12 years, he drifted, drank, did drugs. He was arrested 30 times for a variety of petty crimes and often lived in this park.
I was a bum.
Just a bum.
Yeah, low life, wino,
Yeah.
drug addict, creep,
No future.
pervert,
Nope.
no, SOL.
How was your self-esteem?
Low. Low. Low and obsessively optimistic. I had this...
That's a contradiction, wouldn't we say?
Yes, it is. I had this crazy notion at the height of my self-degradation that I was a pretty smart guy and a capable guy underneath it all.
When he was 29, Ellroy was hospitalized and forced into rehab. For the next 2 years, he made ends meet by caddying at an exclusive L.A. country club.
You went from that moment to becoming, in your own judgment, and also some reviewers, one of America's best novelists. Help me understand how that happened.
On January 26, 1979, when I was almost 31 years old, I was on the 8th hole at Bel Air Country Club, caddying for a fellow and his son, there on a guest pass. And I said, God, I'm not getting any younger. Will you please let me start writing this novel tonight? Now, God did not say, okay, Big Jim, go to it. But I started writing my novel, Brown's Requiem, my first novel, that night, and I've never looked back.
He wrote about what he knew: crime, brutality, death. The book that made his reputation was his sixth, The Black Dahlia, a novel based on a notorious Los Angeles murder in the 1940s. A few years later came L.A. Confidential, a best-selling crime novel that became an Academy Award-winning movie.
Would you be willing to beat a confession out of a suspect you knew to be guilty?
No.
Would you be willing to shoot a hardened criminal in the back in order to offset the chance that some lawyer...
No.
Then, for the love of God, don't be a detective.
But his most significant book may be his most personal. In 1996, Ellroy turned to his own life and wrote the memoir, My Dark Places. It is the story of trying to find his mother's killer. To do that, Ellroy hired retired Detective Bill Stoner. The two started by looking at the long-closed case file, including pictures of his mother in the morgue.
He said, "Are you ready for this?" He said, "They're graphic. I'll pull them out if you want me to." I said, "No, I have to see it all."
You're prepared for it.
I was prepared for it. He brought to me in a plastic bag the dress my mother was wearing at the time of her murder, the overcoat that she was wearing, her nylon stocking, and strangling cord that she was strangled with, and I touched it. And I smelled my mother on the dress, and I remembered her wearing it. I've had some mind-blowing times in my life, and this was one of the most mind-blowing.
Ellroy and Stoner spent 3 years on the investigation. While they never found the killer, Ellroy did find something else. 36 years after her death, he discovered how much he loved the mother he never really knew.
I was 46 years old. I was successful. I was very happily married to a brilliant and great woman. And I realized without Geneva Hilliker Ellroy, my mother, I could not have gotten from there to here. And I realized that I owed her a tremendous debt. And learning who she was and writing about it was the way to pay her back.
But writing that book didn't change his view of the world as a sinister and seedy place. The evidence is there in his next novel, which was just published this spring, The Cole 6000, about the 1960s. It blends real people and fictional characters to create another dark and cynical view of crime in America.
So without further ado, I'd like to introduce James Ellroy.
When he speaks publicly about his books, audiences expect something out of the ordinary. He doesn't disappoint them.
I am the author of Brown's Requiem, Clandestine, Blood on the Moon, Because of the Night, Suicide Hill, Killer on the Road, The Black Dahlia, The Big Nowhere, LA Confidential, White Jazz, Hollywood Nocturnes. These books are all masterpieces. Yeah!
He's written 15 books in all, graphic and grim, people with corrupt cops and killers.
These are books for the whole family. If the name of your family is the Manson family.
But one of James Ellroy's greatest characters may be himself.
How much of this that you deliver for them is a created character that you believe hypes the book, that you believe makes the package more interesting?
It's a created character and a calculated character that's about 7% of who I am.
And is the rest of the 93% duller, less interesting? What?
Studious, meticulous, diligent, driven, and a stay-at-home kind of guy.
Home for Ellroy these days is Kansas City. The boy who lost his innocence in L.A. has found comfort here. Happily married to his second wife, the writer once praised for his word storm of perversity and gore is not as hard-boiled as some might believe.
I think the dividing line between Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler is that Raymond Chandler wrote the kind of man that he wanted to be, and Dashiell Hammett wrote the kind of man that he was afraid he was.
And what about you?
I'm conscious. I strive for it. I believe in wholesomeness. I do not subscribe to the myth of the traumatized, alcoholic, self-destructive writer. People live that way, good for them. I can't live their lives for them. I wouldn't want to live their lives. There is one thing that I come back to over and over and over again, which is this: work hard, think, cultivate silence, plan diligently, plumb your own soul, and try with every fiber of your being to get better and better and better and better and better as a writer, and you will.
How you doing, boss? Hey,
But for all that he has done and the distance he has traveled, James Ellroy will never be far from that street in El Monte, California, and the tragedy that started it all.
It's hard to let go of you and your mother. I mean, I keep wanting to go away from it, and I keep thinking of more things about it. I assume it's a little bit true for you, too, even though you've paid the debt back.
I've paid the debt back. I've answered the questions. I fight for my mother. This may be part of it, Charlie. Closure is fatuous nonsense. An event like this...
It will never be closed.
It'll never be closed. I would like to expunge the word closure from the English language and get a big closure plaque and stick it where the sun doesn't shine with the guy who invented that term. My mother and I continue.
Nothing could bring closure.
No, nothing could bring closure, and I don't want it.